Me on my segment on the simplicity and ugliness of racism in America. I'm really thankful that you could be with me tonight and that we could talk about just African history and the concept of white superiority. First, I want to say again, thank you for all the white friends of ours that have decided that they will stand up against racism, that they will speak up, and that they will not be silent, because it is very important that we all speak up, not just the blacks, but whites as well. And so I want to thank you for that and really look at just what it means to look at African history and to understand how that plays with white supremacy. All right, so first thing is I want to look at just the whole idea of what white supremacy is. The Oxford Dictionary describes white supremacy as the belief that white people are superior to those of all other races, especially the black race, and should dominate society. That's what white supremacy says. They say that they believe that, I'm sorry, they say that they believe that whites should be dominating all other races because they are superior in intelligence and that they are outpacing everybody in every area, and therefore they should be the ones in charge. So during slavery and post-slavery, that's what was operating, and it's still operating right now. The fact that we have racism is because there is this stronghold of holding on to white supremacy. The concept is saying that all whites are better and all whites deserve to be up front, leading the way, and blacks should always be at the bottom. They should be dominated. So when you see something as serious as what happened to George Floyd back in May 2020 this year, it is an example of somebody believing that this black man does not deserve to have what I have as a white person. And that is what that ideology of white supremacy says. It says that they are better and they should dominate the black race and all other races. All right, so the concept started really gaining popularity or really becoming crystallized around the 1800s and in the 1900s, all the way up through, I guess, recent times. But especially around the mid 1950s and 60s, that was a big deal because there was a big push to look for genetic justification for white supremacy. So there was a lot of intelligent testing. There was a lot of documentation to show that when you give a black person this test, this is what they scored. And when you gave a white person this test, this is what they scored. Now, there was a lot of bias in those tests. There was a lot of things that were occurring that people eventually saw that it had nothing to do with which color is more dominant or which color is more intelligent. And so when you have the white supremacy ideology, there are people who are the keepers of the white supremacy ideology. When you hear about the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazi, and we're going to stop everything possible, we're going to stop everything that we need to stop you from doing to show that you are not as important or as significant as we are. And so I wanted us to look some more at just the science of that, because you have a group of people that decided that because of the shade of their skin, they believe that they also have a lot of inherent advantages to people who have shades darker than them. Now, something I want to point out, and some of you may already know this, but something I want to point out is that when science started to look at genetics of the human race, they've been able to trace everybody's race all the way back to one common mother. And they call her mitochondrial Eve. And the idea is saying that there's one mother that every one of us has in common. So we have this gene that's passed on from the first mother to the other mother, and so on and so on and so on. And we all have that same gene in common. So that's like living in the same household, and you have three siblings, and one sibling decides, hey, I'm a little lighter than you. I'm smarter than you because I'm lighter than you. And the darker ones say, well, how could you be smarter than us? Well, we have the same mother and the same father. Or whatever, that could be tricky there. But we have the same parents. It doesn't make sense that people who are believing this ideology are really saying that because of the melanin in our skin, and the melanin that's in the skin of the black person and the white person is really deciding how much pigmentation you're going to have in your skin. Scientifically speaking, blacks have more melanin in their skin, which makes it darker, so that with the sun we can get more protection from ultraviolet rays. Because the more ultraviolet rays that you let your body be exposed to, the more health effects, negative health effects that you will have, which can also lead to cancer. So everybody started in Africa. That's the point I'm making. Everyone started in Africa, so everyone in Africa started with dark skin, with that melanin, because Africa is considered mostly in tropics. You have the equator, and then you have above the equator and below the equator. Most of Africa is in that section of the world. So there was a need to protect the skin of those people, right, against the ultraviolet rays. And so what we see is that because of pigmentation, there's a whole ideology, a whole mindset that says that you are white, I am black, therefore our intelligence is different. That's ridiculous. That is ludicrous. And when you look at what has happened historically, there's something that's called the Great African Migration. All right, that happened about 150,000 years ago, where it is believed that Africans, the original people of the world, Africans, started to migrate to different parts of the globe. And as they migrated to different parts of the globe, there was no need to have all of this extra melanin. There was no need to have all of this dark skin. So the skin started to get lighter, and the changes started to happen so that the person could adapt to areas that have less sunlight and that were colder. So the lighter the skin, the more you could absorb the vitamin D that is produced when the sun hits your skin. So that's what happened. So technically speaking, scientifically speaking, white people are black people. And some of you who are racist, you're going, oh no, do not wish that on me. Of course you're not going to wish it on you, because you know how you have treated black people. But skin, we're all the same. And it's absolutely crazy that such an elaborate system in America and throughout the world has been built on this idea of how your skin is. All right, so what I want to look at further is how, since that's been the ideology, there's been a lot of things that were done to promote this ideology. And one of the things that I think about the most, the earliest memory I have, is this idea. I remember growing up as a kid, and I used to actually love this show called Tarzan. But I always wondered, I said, how is this white man in the middle of the jungle, and he's swinging from tree to tree, and he's considered the king of the jungle, and he's always trying to save this white woman. I think her name was Jane. Or I don't know, maybe that was King Kong. Anyway, he was always trying to save this white woman in the middle of the jungle. And he knew how to speak to the animals of Africa. He knew how to speak to the tribes, the different people of Africa. And he was the king of the jungle. And you know what, as I look back, as I got older and I started to understand this whole racist system and how everything based on white supremacy had to be whitewashed. So everything good had to have white paint put on it. And so this Tarzan was an attempt to show that Africans can't even have their own king of the jungle. We had to transport a white man in there and have him be the king of the jungle. And it's crazy, but that's what has happened and continues to happen in this system. And so what I find really amazing as well is that when people internalize this type of ideology, they really get thrown off when they start working with people who are not white, and they start realizing that those people are just as smart and at times smarter or more capable than they are, and they go through all these emotional and anxiety filled experiences because in their mind they're saying, wait a minute, how is it that this man or this woman who is darker than me actually is more proficient in this area, more intellectual, has solved more issues in this area than I do? They're not supposed to happen. I'm a white person and he's a black person, or she's a black person. And so people go through this inner turmoil because they are internalizing something that really doesn't make sense, that really has no scientific basis and will always fail them. And so this system in America is built to promote this ideology. It's like living in a land of fantasy when all around you, you see things that cause you to have reality. And so when you have crime statistics in America, there's all this push to show blacks are causing all these crimes, blacks should be incarcerated, blacks are stealing. While in America, when a white person does a lot of things, you have white collar crime, right? You have crimes, you have misdemeanors, you have probation, you have a lot of things that are put in place to give them an out. While for the black person, there are things put in place to make sure that they don't get out. And so there's this mass incarceration of blacks. There's this constant push to show that blacks are causing all these crimes. Even though the blacks represent about 10% of the US population, I believe there's over 70% of incarcerations are black people, which is not true. But the reality is, I read the Bible, I'm a Christian. The reality is every man on this earth is guilty of sin. Every man, every woman. There's no one race or other that's more guilty or causes more sin than others. Everybody will need to face God and say to God, this is what I've done wrong, and this is what I know I'm going to get as a penalty because I never changed my ways. And so there's this whole thing about white superiority that's being fostered in America, especially after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865, where the attitude is, that's significant, we're going to take it away from them. We're just going to do everything possible to make sure that black people do not advance in America. But while they're doing this, black people are advancing, they're learning how to read, they're graduating from college, all these different things, and they're going, whoa, something is wrong. Yes, something is wrong. You have to let go of this ideology because it does not make sense. It doesn't hold water. It's not true. You're deceiving yourselves and thinking that this is something to live by. But it's hard for you to let it go because you've lived by it for most of the time that America has existed. So enough of the white supremacy. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about Africa. Africa, the land that was unfortunately called the Dark Continent. The land that even now when we look at videos of Africa, you go, oh, they're still in the jungle? No, they're not still in the jungle. They have sprawling cities. They've had sprawling cities. They've had great civilizations. They've had a lot of great things that contributed to all of civilizations, especially Western civilization. So Africa is a great place. It's an awesome place. First thing, I want to give you some interesting facts about Africa. The continent of Africa, it's a continent, is about 11.73 million square miles wide altogether. That's the area of Africa. The size of the United States is about 3.7977 million square miles. You can fit 3 United States of America inside of Africa. Africa is huge. Now, when you look at the map of Africa, of the world, and you look at the globe, it looks like Africa is about the same size as South America, or you could possibly compare to the United States. But I would say, conjecture, I would say that's a racist mindset, that they even show it that way. Why don't you show Africa for the size that it is? That Africa would be like this on the world map, and the U.S. would be like this. It's massive, all right? It's the second largest continent in the world. Okay, Asia is the biggest. Now, there's this, the Sahara Desert that is in Africa is also bigger than the United States. That's like saying the whole United States could be a whole desert. But the Sahara Desert, the Sahara Desert is bigger than the United States. Africa is not one country. It is not one land. So stop saying, are you from Africa, to people. Ask them, what country in Africa are you from? Africa has 54 recognized countries, nations. There are 54 nations in Africa, recognized by the United Nations. All right? There are over 2,000 languages that are spoken in Africa. It's over 2,000. All right? While the U.S. history has about 244 years, Africa's history is over 200,000 years. African civilization has been around for over 200,000 years. And so those who are white supremacists should really be saying, Africans, you're our big brother. We have a lot that we can learn from you. And rather than say that, they invented this concept of, we're better than them, we're more powerful, we've done more amazing things, look at our great advances, when a lot of the advances that they have also came from Africa. It's funny, I mean, I don't care about black, white. I don't say to myself, I'm smarter than this black guy, or I'm smarter than this white guy. It doesn't matter. We're all really just people. We all come from God. That's the reality of it. But I'm getting into the silliness of this because people are actually thinking this way, and I'm hoping that they will learn to think differently as they hear these kind of things, that they're going to look at themselves and go, good point. I guess the skin thing doesn't really translate to mind power. You know, I'm trying to think. I don't even think we have superheroes that their power comes from the color of their skin. I am super skin. No, that doesn't happen. And even in comics, we don't do that. But in reality, people are doing that. Popularized in Egypt, is really known for something that's in Egypt, but it actually existed 5,000 years, even 1,000 years before Egypt. There's a mummy that they found in sub-Sahara Africa. That's another funny thing, sub-Sahara, southern Africa, northern Africa, because that's also a way that people who are into this race thing make it like, oh yeah, the ones at the top are lighter, and no, they were all darker. In fact, it's believed that the people from southern Africa are the ones who eventually populated northern Africa. And then you got to remember, there's been a lot of colonization of Africa, so all different people came in. And as they were colonized by the Europeans, the races got lighter and lighter. So if you look at current races in Africa and what you call Northern Africa, you can say, oh, they're white, they're light skinned or whatever. But they were darker before that. That's the reality of it. So you can't just go, we claim Egypt as ours. No, there were darker people, Negroid people, black people who were in Egypt before that. In fact, the ones who started Egypt were from southern Africa and moved up. Now, I have not looked into this much, so you can look into it. It's believed that there was a part of northern Africa that was mostly covered by water. Once the water receded, people from southern Africa moved up. I have to look into that much further, but it's something that's interesting to look into. So the people that were believed to have moved up to northern Africa and eventually influenced Egypt to become what it is, are people, they were known as the Berber people, okay? So the thing I also want to look at is that this concept of, I was looking up some history about Africa, and this concept I heard of, who discovered Africa? And I go, no, nobody discovered Africa. I think the people who were there, they already knew they were there. They knew they existed. But of course, it's really saying, if I'm coming from Portugal, I discovered it for Portugal. Oh, guys, there's a land with all these black people or dark-skinned people or whatever. I discovered it for Portugal, or I discovered for whatever. Now, in college, while I was at Princeton, there's a friend of mine who introduced me to this book, and it was called They Came Before Columbus. And when I looked at the book and I looked at the premise of the book, I said, wow. The book was saying how Africans traveled the world and populated and mingled with people in North America. So they came before Columbus is to say that Africans were on North America for thousands of years before the Europeans came to North America. Also populated South America, influenced South America. That's why you have the Great Pyramids, you have the faces, you have the statues with a big nose, right? The Negroid nose. My nose is kind of wide. Yeah, that kind of nose. You have those statues because of an African influence. In fact, somebody was telling me years ago how when Mexicans would have black people visit their country, they're like, "Ooh, let me touch you because it means good luck. It means good luck to touch a black person." I believe that's tied to the fact that they were influenced by black people in the past that came to their land. And so I'm really curious to look into more about the whole idea of the American Indian, because I'm sure there's a lot there that we need to find out. So that book is called They Came Before Columbus, and I think the author's name is Michael Van Sertima. That's something, I haven't looked the name up lately, but that's what I remember. There are a lot of major empires that you can look up about Africa. Look up the Mali Empire because they did amazing things. All right, you look up the Benin Empire. That empire is what is now known as present-day Nigeria. They had made tremendous bronze statues and sculptures and artwork that when the British came to colonize it, they just could not conceive that these people that they wanted to consider primitive had done all of this. And they wanted to believe that some other nation did it. And then they realized, no, these black-skinned people actually did this stuff. And they have a whole history of having done a lot of things. Look up the Zulu warriors, the Zulu nation. That's where that comes from. They were extremely intelligent in warfare, right? And they had an amazing way of surrounding their enemy and dominating them. So look up the Zulu nation. Look up the Kushites, another group of powerful people in Africa. Look at Phoenicia. Look at the Nubians, and all of these people. All these nations, all these influencers, they also influenced Egypt. They influenced Egypt's writing. Egypt influenced the Phoenicians, I believe. And then eventually the Greeks were influenced. The Romans were influenced. And ta-da, Western world was influenced. But all these things came from Africa. Your big brother Africa was generous enough to lend their advancements, their amazing discoveries, and pass it on forward. And so there's another nation, the people of Zimbabwe. They have tremendous technological structures that they built. So you could look up the people of Zimbabwe, the ancient Zimbabwe, and look at what they did to show that, hey, you cannot call Africa the dark continent or this continent of uncivilized people when they are the ones that started civilizations. They are the ones that have lent a hand to us and given us what we have today. And so we have to look at, of course, there's Egypt and all the great things that Egypt is known for. I always found it funny how when I was growing up, I would look at things about Egypt, and the people would always not always, but people would say on television, the ones who were doing the documentary, they would say, were there aliens that did this? Or did they come from outer space that they were able to build these structures? It's like they could not conceive that, oh yeah, I think there's some black people that did these things. Yeah, the people that had a lot of melanin in their skin actually did this. Yes, that's the reality of it. And so what What I also find funny is this. The Bible describes Jesus Christ as someone who had woolly hair. This is woolly hair, right? Woolly hair. His hair was white like wool, and his legs were like bronze. Yet, because of white supremacy and this whole racism issue, there's this picture of Jesus that's being exported all over the world that's blonde hair, blue eyes. Those people were not there in Africa or the Middle East. That's not. Anyway, the Bible in Revelations chapter 1, verses 14 and 15 says that. Now, there are times where somebody will say, why do you have to talk about Jesus and his race? That's not important. Yes, it is very important. You know why I say it's very important? Because you would rather have a white, blonde Jesus with blue eyes and keep putting that in front of me and tell me that everything good is white and everything bad is black. And then when I point it out, you go, that's not important. It must be very important because you have that picture all over the world. You're colonizing the world with that image of saying, this is your Jesus, when that's not the reality. But anyway, when everything is said and done, we're going to know the whole story. The truth will come out. But when you look at history, we know that didn't happen that way. The other thing I want to say about African culture or the African continent and the peoples of Africa is that they really value their ancestors a lot and the connection that they had to their ancestors. They believe that their ancestors moved them forward and helped them out. And so they valued the contributions that the ancestors gave to them. And they also believe that they need to use morality to combat others. That was the attitude. So what I will be doing as I'm wrapping up is saying to you that we've only skimmed the surface of this. But I wanted to look at what is the mechanism that works in white supremacy. White supremacy is saying, I'm white and I'm better than you, I'm more important to you, and most importantly, I'm smarter than you, and I need to dominate you. And I'm going to do everything with my laws, with my police, with my financial institutions, my social institutions, everything that you can, everywhere you can be as a black person. I want you to feel and understand that you are less than me. That's what white supremacy is saying. And white supremacy is not what America is. It will take a lot of force, a lot of determination to undo this fabric and to sew it back up into something that's legitimate and meaningful and useful for all of America. But right now you have a group of people who decided that from the inception of America, that whites will always be on top and blacks will be at the bottom. And once they started to write laws, they made sure the laws were written according to that ideology. And that's really how the laws work. We have to undo the laws. We have to continue this conversation. We have to keep pushing forward so that this will be done in a different way. Because what's happening now, there's a lot of intellectual appropriation. There's a lot of people who are white who are taking things from blacks and have always taken things from blacks to substantiate their vision of what white supremacy is. You cannot possibly let blacks have great inventions and say they're doing this and that and still say we're better than them. So you have to keep taking things from them and say, nope, a white person did it. Nope, a white person did it. Nope, black people did not contribute much to America, when we know that's not true. So that is the issue with America. Everything good that comes from a black person, they want to put a white face on it. That's how it works. Don't get upset because I'm saying that. That is the reality of it. And I'm understanding it. And I want more people to understand it. And I want more people to talk about it so that while you're sitting there in your little bubble believing this, you'll feel ashamed that you actually believe this because it's ridiculous. And so thank you for listening to part 2 of my series on the simplicity and Ugliness of Racism in America, where we talked about African history and white supremacy. The next part is going to be part 3, and I am calling that one America Still Living Off the Black Population. America Still Living Off the Black Population. And we're going to get into that and look at what does that mean, that America is living off of black people. Thank you for listening. I appreciate what you being here, and I look forward to you being with me next time. Have a great day.